So I just want to finish off the conversation with like just wrapping up like block editing
Yes.
and the current new way of building out WordPress sites
Right.
and like the
So
dramatic holistic differences between now and like 3 years ago. And let's
right.
just not bring up the fact that everyone is still using the old way.
Yeah, exactly. It will come because WordPress has dove headfirst into this. There's no going back, right? So it will be a totally block editing experience at one point in time. When, we'll see. That's going to depend on the user adoption, stuff like that. People are kind of like fighting with it, especially when most of the demographic is using Divi and Elementor and things that are counter to the actual block editor. But just to finish my thought from before is like, yes, before as a developer working with WordPress, it was a CMS. It wasn't the greatest CMS, but it was a CMS, and you can deal with that, especially with ACF and stuff like that. You can really get it to fit your needs in terms of like collecting whatever data you need from the user and then displaying it through a theme, right? And then Sage helped with that and all that. It was great. But now with the editor, it's let's put the display and all the control and everything in the end user's hand. And that's dangerous if we don't know what direction we're taking there, right? Because if you're going to try and use that as a CMS, it's a bad time because you can't control for how a user is going to put things together. Because now you're tasked with the actual design of your page, right? You have control over moving things around and changing all sorts of settings. It's no longer, it used to be as a CMS, you just kind of use WordPress as the data layer, the database and the data, and then the theme, well, you kept all the display in there and you try not to give too much control to the user because users will break things if there's too much control. Now you have infinite control in the editor.
I just want to like touch upon that topic of like your categorization of WordPress now. So you said it started as a blog, evolved into a CMS, still on somewhat of a blogging engine, but it's been used used as a CMS, and it's been now it's the number one CMS tool in the world online. But now you're saying it's no longer a CMS. So what's that new title? It would be called a web builder, a website
It's
builder.
build it yourself kind of website platform, right? So it's in direct competition now with things like Wix and Squarespace and
Webflow.
Duda or Webflow, yeah.
Right.
Where the end user is you're building your interface in the back end. You're coding a lot less, and so you're using pre-built modules and tools to do the job. But now it's not the responsibility is not just taking in your user input in like a more raw format. No, you're building the whole goddamn thing through the back end of WordPress.
Okay.
And so it's a very radical shift from how we used to do things as a developer. For the end user, the user that's been using WordPress not as a developer but just as a site builder or whatever, it's actually probably great in a smooth transition, right? Because before they had a WYSIWYG and they could only bold text and maybe float some things and put some images in, and now they can do all sorts of things in the editor, and they can even do it with some full site editing. They can do that same thing to their header and their footer, and they have full control. It's great. But as a developer trying to make a finished, polished, handcrafted product, it is for a customer who is not the end, who will be the end user, but it shouldn't be making these changes and design changes. It's a recipe for disaster.
Right. So
we've had some projects where still built on Sage, but I've really leveraged the editor, so we have tons of like kind of custom components in the editor for the user to use. And this is like pretty one of our later themes built within the last year, and it works. It's so easy for the customer to break the site, and there's really no way around it.
Right.
And so you can't give them that much control on a large site like that.
So if I had to compare, some of the conceptual methods to theming prior to block editing, you have you set up a theme, a new theme, you name it whatever you want, or you can buy a theme. But let's say you're creating your own theme, you're basing it
Sure.
off a a boilerplate, or you're doing custom from scratch, or you're just duplicating the default theme and renaming it something as you wish,
Mm-hmm.
whatever your method is, and then you create like page templates.
Mm-hmm.
And these page templates are specific to the design, let's say, of that web page, or whatever reasons why you need
Well,
specific.
they'll be built into the theme. They'll already be there. Are you talking from the user's standpoint or from the
No, from a
developers?
developer experience,
Okay.
so you're building out page templates, and then that way, you can choose that page template on a specific post type, like a page, and then based on that page template, you might have either some custom fields via
Yeah, some
ACF,
extra features and stuff. Yeah.
extra features, or like different areas to put your content. Those areas in the content using the default WYSIWYG editor still will then just enter into those specific sections on the page template when it renders on the website, right?
Yeah, except I would replace the whole WYSIWYG thing with ACF. Like if you were a developer building themes like that for the last few years, you're probably using some sort of custom field tool. You can do it yourself too through WordPress. WordPress obviously has custom fields baked in, but the backend controls aren't super nice for it. So that's why I use something like ACF. I want
Right.
a date control. I want a upload an image here or whatever. So it was really ACF and like similar type of plugins for custom fields that really made WordPress into a proper CMS,
Right.
because we were able to ditch the main page editor and leave that only for blog posts and the main page content. But then on your page templates, like you were saying, we were able to put all sorts of really intricately placed fields that were added on the back end through a tightly validated data control, right? I'm going to add this date and it's specifically formatted as a date. So then when I get it into my
Right.
template, I can display it how I want.
So basically, it's more or less kind of just like a really big form that you fill out, and that form has designated
Yeah.
areas in a template page where it will display. And you might have some logic on your template page. You'll take those fields, maybe do something with it, maybe change the formatting or change the styling or whatever you want to do with your logic type of thing.
It was a
More or
form,
less.
and that coupled with the concept of custom post types in WordPress, which was your collections of things, right? Collections of custom models,
Right.
meaning, a post type would be a page or a post, or in a more generic sense, when you start customizing for a client, projects or employees, or write some sort of generic data model so you can like easily add like a list of them and then dynamically display it in the site.
Right.
That sort of collection of models is a standard feature of any CMS, right?
Right.
And
So
that's why
now
we're
we're
CMS, because its post model was able to do that because it was flexible.
so right now we're walking into the space of no longer data entry as a CMS. Now we're walking into a space where it's more, here's an empty canvas, but here are, elements, components, it's blocks. Obviously it's called blocks, but I'm just trying to find different
Sure.
synonyms that could be relatable from different web
UI
builder
elements.
platforms, other UI
Yeah.
elements, where, hey, I want to add a slider here, add a slider. I want to add a heading here, here's a heading. And it's more like a drag and drop scenario. So more or less is giving a WordPress user the experience of installing and using Elementor or Divi, except natively within WordPress.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Now, off the bat, how many blocks does your WordPress theme come with?
It's a good question. It is growing by the day. WordPress team's been pretty good with adding more and more.
Inherently in the core, when you update your core, you do get more
Oh
blocks.
yeah, well, because the and it used to be because everything's a block in the editor. Everything's a block.
Right.
You add text, a paragraph, it's a paragraph block. You add a
Right.
list, that's a list block. But they can obviously get a lot more complex. It's kind of the same thing as like before everything was a post in WordPress, right?
Right.
A page was a post, a media thing was a post. It's so flexible. So it's cool that it's flexible, but you have to, you got to make a lot of things with that. So
Right.
yeah, I mean, there's like yeah, they're adding more powerful blocks by the day, and it's great. But at the end of the day, you know, there's always going to be demand for more blocks. It's like, how many blocks can you really fit in there without actually resorting to just building something on the code level? You know what I mean? And it's tricky to actually code out a block right now. If you're coming from from a WordPress, more of a traditional WordPress development background, which would be heavy into PHP. Now it's heavy into JavaScript and
So
build
the tech
tools and all
stack's
sorts of
changed.
things.
The tech stack has changed.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, Matt Mullenweg, like a few years ago, at the state of address for WordPress or whatever, he said very explicitly, like, if you want to move forward in WordPress as a part of the community and developer, can you hear me?
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
we're good.
okay. That you need to double down, triple down onto JavaScript. You need to get intimate. I think his words were, you need to get intimately familiar with JavaScript, something like that. And yeah, definitely true.
Well,
Definitely
in,
true.
in general, in the world of programming languages and frameworks, it is kind of like, regardless of your CMS or framework or tool you're choosing, in the bare bones programming languages, it is heading in that proper trend direction where most web apps, most softwares are leaning off of server side programming languages and are kind of leaning toward you know, JavaScript, for example, dramatically, like with
Yeah.
frameworks such as like React or Vue or something along those lines.
I mean,
And there's
it's the only language on the client, the only enforced language for a web browser, right? You can only write JavaScript besides HTML and CSS, which is really just markup. You If you want to write a program in the browser, only JavaScript. There's WebAssembly too, that's coming, but that's a different conversation. But it's literally just JavaScript. And so more and more the entire um, web ecosystem is going to be working around that. And like, so it makes sense to even, also, if you're gonna, like, JavaScript's the language to learn. If you're in web, you need to know JavaScript.
right,
And so if you're gonna choose a backend language, you might as well choose Node because it's JavaScript and you'll just get better at JavaScript. And so that'll translate to to the
right,
browser, right? You'll
right,
just be able to write it everywhere really well.
right.
Um, but it doesn't, yeah, on the back end, it doesn't mean it's the best language to choose, but it is required on the front end.
So as a developer, not a new developer in WordPress, but let's say a developer that has, a few years experience, having, built out websites in more standard, traditional theming, page template, ACF field type of methodology, and then moving to block editing, and they don't know JavaScript, there will be a learning curve on programming language state.
Yes, yes, they
Okay.
will need to know React,
Okay, they'll need to know React. Okay, so with
which is
blocks,
interesting, yeah, because
with
it's
blocks, if you don't have something that you need out of the box from the WordPress core as a block or UI element or a module, a component, whatever you want to call it, in terms of being able to drag something onto your page and editing it and then publishing it quickly,
mhm.
can you make your own custom blocks? Is that possible?
Yeah, you can make your own custom blocks, but you need to be a good programmer. It's not you can't do it as like, oh, I'm passingly familiar with, which was why I want to which is why I think WordPress took off too, because it had a low barrier to entry to like getting into coding. Like if you need to customize something in your theme, it's like, well, you go in there and you add a couple lines or you drop in this piece of code and it's going to do what you want. And but to do a custom block, it's like, no, you have to know how everything's working here. You have to know, you have to have a build. WordPress luckily provides one pretty good package for building your custom block plugin, but it's a whole setup. It's a whole developer experience, and on top of that, it's not just vanilla JavaScript. You well, no, you can't. Like, it is using React for your editor, so you also now have to know React, which is another framework. Which, by all means, like, it's a great framework to use in the web. It's definitely a good bet on WordPress side, but it's another technology, and it's baked intimately into WordPress at this point,
Yeah.
at least in the back end.
Right. Okay. So it's fair to say that, like, with this new block editing, Gutenberg, and new version of WordPress, that, you know, it could be a website builder. It could be natively an Elementor and a Divi. That's
Was that the end of the question? Yeah.
yeah. So it can be.
It is.
It
It
is.
is. It
Okay.
is now. It's still kind of catching up. It's not fully matured.
Right.
But if you've installed the latest version and your theme is block capable, that is what it is. Everything
Right.
is done. The entire 2022 block theme was more or less developed directly from the back end of WordPress. It was saved as a theme, right, with like all the patterns that are in it and stuff like that. But it was essentially developed entirely from the back end of WordPress,
Right.
right? So it was built itself. It wasn't even really coded. It was built with the framework. So it's there now. The default theme in WordPress this year is something that was built from the builder, the framework. It wasn't coded out, right?
So there's no theme development, let's say.
As a minor amount, right?
Okay.
Taking the pre-built blocks and saving them as some patterns and a little bit of setup, but like
So as the transition is happening from like standard theme development to block editing and full site editing, can somebody from that old mentality just keep trucking forward, saying, you know what, I don't want to learn React, I don't want to learn JavaScript, I'm just going to impose my already learned methods into the new
definitely,
framework? Yeah, you
yeah,
can.
you can, yeah, you can, but I don't think it would be a wise choice. It's a
Why is
ticking
that?
time bomb. It's a ticking time bomb.
What is?
Well, if you want to, you're gonna have to start installing all sorts of plugins to maintain the old like editor and stuff like that, like the classic editor, and but you're gonna have less and less themes that stay up to date with that classical. And you just won't stay up to date, and the web moves so fast. I think people should, especially developers, should know these days that you've got to update your software. And if you don't like the updates you're getting, change your software. But it's not really I don't think it's really a tenable solution to just stop updating or try to do things in an old way, because they're just going to get older faster.
Right.
The web moves exponentially fast. So, if
But
something
that
got
could
old
be
over,
said regardless of whatever you've chosen as your framework or tool of choice for developing anything, right?
yes, yeah.
Everything does change with time.
Well,
Like
that's why I say it's just not a wise decision, right? Because
right,
WordPress or not, you should be keeping up to date with
right.
whatever your platform is. Keep up to date with it, and if you don't like the updates, change.
It also sounds like this is going to be a much better experience for those who are not developers by trade, who use WordPress significantly, which I'm going to assume majority of WordPress users are not developer friendly, right? So if they can
Yeah,
out of the
I don't.
box drag and drop, edit, and publish something that has been customized to their liking without a developer, that seems to be an advantage.
Maybe. I'm not sure. It remains to be seen.
Because it seems
I
to me
hope
that's
so.
why the success of Elementor and Divi is from inherently that you don't need a developer to do your new landing page for your marketing campaign.
Yeah, but at the same time, you kind of stop at a very low level once you need to do something more complicated, and then no developer wants to touch those sites, right? They're not
That use
maintainable
Elementor.
they're not maintainable as a large site, right?
You could
They really
like
are for
using
starter
Elementor.
sites. They really are for like a starting point. Like they're great if you want to make a prototype of a site as a user that doesn't know how to code. Now, and the reason why I'm hesitant to say just yes to this is because two things. One, it just gives a little way too much control for users to build their sites, right? Um, I am a believer that there should be some restrictions in terms of like what you're able to do, because it's easy to break things. And also, number two is just it is a skill to use the editor. With a flexible tool like that that can do so much, and I'm not knocking the editor, the block editor, Gutenberg. it's great, and you can do a lot. It's super flexible, but inherently in the fact that it's so flexible, um, and you can do so much with it, it means it takes more of a skill to actually create something with it.
Same could be said
There's more
about
to
other
learn.
web builders. Like every web builder, it will be inherently its own skill set. Like you can't go from like Webflow to Duda and have the same experience or not have a learning curve. I mean, it
Y-
will be learning curves regardless.
Yeah, but you want to minimize that for your adoption of your platform. And WordPress is so flexible that I can't see it being that simple for most users. That and I could be wrong, like you said, like it could be just as complicated as any other builder, and so it competes well enough. I hope
Right.
that's the case, but I'm highlighting why I think that it may be an issue in the future
Right.
for some people. It's a little too much power to wield for a novice, even if you're not touching code.
Right. I mean, the same argument could be said about WordPress before too. Like
Yeah, totally.
you
There's a lot of bad sites that came out of it. I'm coming from a perspective of like, because I know a quality site. So, when I see something that's being built
I
that's
mean,
not
I
great,
mean,
it's like,
that's always been kind of like my problem with like web builders is that like they're giving power to people to
yeah,
pretend to be professionals in a space.
well, exactly. And I think that's my gripe is that it's not even WordPress specific. It's like all web builders. Like
Right.
I think they're great for prototyping, for
Right.
MVP sites,
Right.
for stuff on a budget, but let's not, use them for something enterprise, guys. Come on. Like,
Right.
you want quality at that point. You don't want to mess around with, things that can be built by anybody.
Right.
It's a
Right.
little too, yeah.
Right. So just
And
in
that's the
general,
space WordPress is in now. So
right. But
see what
just
happens.
all right. So to recap on the block editing, tech stacks change for any developers out there thinking to want to build out new sites with the new version of WordPress, full site editing, block editing, Gutenberg, all that. Tech stacks change. You got to learn JavaScript and React. Um, but there's some positive to it. They're trying to compete in that space of, let's call it, the DIY web builders, where it's more GUI related and can most times end at the GUI aspect of things. You don't have to go in the code and edit unless you want to do custom blocks that don't exist.
Hmm.
Um,
Pretty much.
but it could be a good thing. It could be a good thing. And I think it's a smart move, not only just on the changing the tech stack to be up to date, but giving, empowering users that are not devs. And that's kind of the concept of software, is like you're empowering people to have some type of, you know, um, programming power without being a programmer. So
Yeah, totally. It's the whole, who's it, Uncle Ben,
uh,
with great power
absolutely.
comes great responsibility. So let's hope
Yeah, I
everyone's
feel it.
responsible with the websites they build.
Yeah, for
And
sure. But like, I think some people, users out there deserve some credit. Like there's people out there who take Elementor seriously and they
yep.
do all their training with
Oh,
Elementor and they
it's a
follow their
market.
resources, and it's a
Yeah.
huge market because they make a career out of it. So it's
Hmm.
worthwhile to be a professional within a certain, skill set
Yes.
in
But that's
WordPress.
what I want to call it, right? It's like going back to, that's why I'm a little biased, right? Because I am a developer. So I'm not a Gutenberg professional or an Elementor professional. I'm a developer that either builds these tools or builds, like, a good final nice polished website, right? With whatever the customer wants. Doesn't matter if it's not available, whatever they want, they get, right? So I'm coming from a bit of a different perspective on a bit of a, uh, you know, more advanced servicing type of mentality.
Right.
But if it's, if you have somebody that needs to get something done in an editor and you need some help with it, by all means, that's a professional space, and there's plenty of work there. Um, but it's yeah, now it's a transitionary space in WordPress, so it's gonna be interesting.
Yeah, it's interesting, and I'm looking forward to our projects in that field as well, because
Totally.
I believe that WordPress users, professional WordPress users in general, is its own skill set, and I think a
Hmm.
lot of them will adapt to it because I think they believe in WordPress and they like it, and Proofs in the pudding. You look at the numbers out there, and they're still number one, and not by a little bit. They didn't just inch. They didn't win by nose. They've lapped people several times over. And
Yeah, and I will say too, the performance of using your block editor is like staggeringly good.
better than Elementor.
Yeah, I haven't done any testing on Elementor recently, but last time I checked, it was pretty poor. Usually, it's just there's just way too much going on, way too much included uh, libraries and packages and stuff like that.
So that's a
to
huge
run it.
advantage. That is an advantage of adopting this new way of building out sites. Is one is you get to have a GUI experience, and the second part is you don't have to sacrifice performance.
No, not that I can tell so far. It will
That's
depend on,
huge.
at least if you're using the native blocks. If you start using third-party blocks that may be irresponsible with how they load assets on the page and stuff like that, it's a different
Right.
story. But native blocks, no, it's very performant.